billionaire had imagined many things that could destroy his engagement: betrayal, lies, cheating, greed. But never this. He never imagined walking into his own mansion and finding his beautiful fiancée with both hands wrapped around the throat of his poor black maid, choking the life out of her while hissing through clenched teeth. "Delete it, or your little brother dies next." The young maid's eyes were swollen with tears. Her face had already begun turning blue. Her trembling fingers searched desperately across the polished marble floor for her phone as her vision blurred. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't scream. She couldn't fight back. And just when it looked like she was about to lose consciousness, she made one unexpected choice. Not to scratch her attacker. Not to beg for mercy. Not even to dial 911. Instead, her shaking thumb pressed a single button on her phone. One quiet decision, so small that nobody inside that hallway noticed it. Yet that single tap would destroy one of America's most admired socialites, expose a conspiracy hidden inside a billion-dollar empire, and force one billionaire to question whether he had been sleeping beside a monster all along. But what secret was the poor black maid willing to die to protect? Why was the billionaire's own fiancée so desperate to silence her before Ethan Carter discovered the truth? And how could one frightened maid's final decision open a billionaire's eyes and begin the most humiliating revenge anyone in that mansion had ever witnessed? 3 weeks earlier, the morning sun bathed Carter Mansion in brilliant golden light, making the enormous estate shine like a palace. Acres of perfectly trimmed gardens surrounded a mansion built from imported Italian marble and floor-to-ceiling glass. Luxury cars rested beneath the grand entrance, while security officers monitored every gate with military precision. The estate reflected the man who owned it, Ethan Carter. At only 34 years old, Ethan had transformed a struggling logistics company he inherited from his late father into Carter Global Holdings, a multinational empire worth tens of billions of dollars. His company owned shipping lines, technology firms, renewable energy projects, and commercial real estate across several countries. Business magazines regularly placed him among America's most respected young billionaires, not because he flaunted wealth, but because he built businesses that treated employees fairly. Despite his fortune, Ethan lived with discipline rather than extravagance. Every morning began before sunrise with a workout, a review of overnight business reports, and breakfast with whichever staff members happened to be preparing the dining room. He remembered names. He asked about sick relatives. He congratulated gardeners on blooming flowers. Some executives mocked him for being too soft. They had no idea why. Years earlier, Ethan had stood beside a hospital bed watching his widowed mother struggle to smile through pain she never deserved. She insisted her caregivers treated her wonderfully whenever he visited. Only after her funeral did hidden security footage reveal the horrifying truth. The same caregivers who called her Mrs. Carter with gentle voices while Ethan stood nearby mocked her the moment he left. They ignored her cries for water. They stole jewelry from her bedroom. They laughed when she struggled to stand. By the time Ethan learned the truth, she was already gone. The guilt became a wound that never healed. Standing before her grave beneath gray autumn skis, he made a promise that quietly governed every decision thereafter. "I will never judge people by how they treat someone richer than themselves. I will judge them by how they treat the people who can never repay them." That promise shaped Carter Global Holdings. Executives who insulted janitors were dismissed regardless of profits. Managers who abused assistants never lasted long. Employees knew one thing about Ethan Carter: respect was not optional. What Ethan didn't realize was that evil rarely showed its face to the person holding the power. Across town, another luxury estate prepared for the day. Victoria Blake stood before a full-length mirror while a stylist adjusted her cream-colored designer dress. Diamonds sparkled around her neck. Fashion magazines called her one of America's most elegant philanthropists. Social media adored her charity galas and carefully staged videos of her handing gifts to disadvantaged children. Millions believed she possessed the perfect heart. Almost none of it was real. Her smile had become another carefully rehearsed performance. Her mother, Miranda Blake, had spent decades teaching her one lesson. Never let wealthy people see the real you. They only reward perfection. Victoria had obeyed since childhood. She learned which smile looked most sincere, which tears appeared believable, which compliments wealthy men loved hearing. Even her charity foundation existed largely because favorable headlines attracted powerful investors and influential friends. Hidden beneath that polished image was something colder. A woman who measured every relationship by what it could buy her. As she fastened an expensive bracelet, Miranda entered carrying a leather planner. "The engagement gala is only 3 weeks away," Miranda said. Victoria smiled confidently. "I know. You've waited long enough." "I didn't wait," Victoria corrected calmly. "I invested." Miranda's lips curled into a proud smile. "Exactly." Neither woman noticed the subtle cruelty hidden inside that single word. Invested. Not loved. Invested. Far across the city, in a modest apartment where peeling paint covered aging walls, another young woman folded the only maid's uniform she owned. Her name was Grace Johnson. She was 21 years old. The apartment was small enough that the kitchen blended into the living room, while one narrow hallway connected 2 tiny bedrooms. Every piece of furniture had been repaired more than once. The refrigerator hummed loudly because replacing it simply wasn't possible. Grace carefully ironed her uniform for the 3rd time. She couldn't afford wrinkles. Across the room, 14-year-old Marcus sat finishing his homework. "You've checked that uniform at least 10 times, he laughed. Grace smiled without looking up. "I know. You already got the job." "I know. You'll be fine." She finally looked at him. "I have to be." Marcus lowered his pencil. Ever since both parents had died, first their father from a construction accident, then their mother after a long illness, Grace had quietly abandoned her dream of becoming a nurse. College savings disappeared into rent, hospital bills, groceries, and school fees. She never complained. She simply worked. Morning shifts, night shifts, weekend cleaning jobs. Anything that kept Marcus in school. She often skipped meals without telling him. She secretly patched holes in her shoes instead of buying new ones. Every sacrifice had one purpose. Marcus would have opportunities she lost. He looked at her carefully. "You'll still come home every evening." Grace forced another smile. "Of course." She didn't mention the bus ride, or the extra hours, or the fear sitting inside her stomach. This job at Carter Mansion paid nearly 3 times what she earned cleaning offices. If she lost it, everything collapsed. As she packed her small canvas bag, her eyes paused on an old family photograph sitting beside the doorway. She gently touched the frame. "I'll make this worth it," she whispered. Outside, the first city bus of the morning rumbled toward one of the richest neighborhoods in America. Grace climbed aboard without realizing that this ordinary trip would place her directly in the path of 2 people whose lives seemed perfect from the outside. One billionaire searching for a loyal partner. One woman determined to own everything he had. And before 3 weeks had passed, Grace would become the one witness neither of them could ever ignore. The city bus rolled through neighborhoods that seemed to belong to two different worlds. Grace Johnson sat quietly by the window, her worn canvas bag resting on her lap. As the bus left behind aging apartment buildings and cracked sidewalks, the scenery slowly transformed into wide tree-lined streets, luxury boutiques, and gated communities, where every lawn looked as though it had been measured with a ruler. She stared outside without envy. She wasn't dreaming of becoming rich. She was simply praying for stability. A steady paycheck. A safe home for Marcus. Enough groceries to last until the end of every month. Nothing more. Her phone vibrated. A message from Marcus appeared. "Good luck today, sis. Mom and Dad would be proud of you." Grace smiled through watery eyes. She quickly typed back, "Study hard. I'll call during lunch." She slipped the phone into her bag, unaware that in just a few weeks, that same phone would become the most valuable object inside Carter Mansion. The bus finally stopped a few blocks from the mansion's private entrance. Grace stepped off, took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and walked toward the enormous wrought iron gates. The Carter estate looked even larger than it had in the photographs she'd seen online. Towering fountains danced beneath the morning sunlight. Rare flowers lined the winding driveway. Luxury vehicles, worth more than her entire apartment building, sat parked beneath a massive marble portico. For a brief moment, she wondered if she truly belonged there. A security officer approached with a welcoming smile. "You must be Grace Johnson." "Yes, sir." He checked her identification before handing it back. "Welcome to Carter Mansion." "Thank you. I've worked security here for 12 years, the man said while opening the gate. "Mr. Carter has one rule he repeats more than any other." Grace listened carefully. "Everyone deserves respect. Doesn't matter whether you're the CEO or the person washing dishes." Grace nodded. "That sounds nice." The guard smiled. "It is. That's why most of us have stayed here for years." His words eased some of the fear in her chest. But as she walked toward the mansion, she never noticed another pair of eyes quietly watching her arrival from an upstairs balcony. Victoria Blake slowly lowered the coffee cup in her hand. "So," she watched Grace disappear through the front entrance. "This must be the new maid." Her voice carried no warmth, only curiosity. Behind her stood Miranda Blake. The employment agency said she's quiet. Victoria continued watching the front door. They always seem quiet in the beginning. Miranda noticed the look in her daughter's eyes. "You don't like hearing new staff." "I don't like strangers." She took another sip of coffee. "Especially strangers who listen more than they speak." Miranda gave a faint smile. "Then make sure she doesn't stay long enough to become comfortable." Victoria didn't answer, but the slight smile forming on her lips said enough. Downstairs, Grace entered the mansion and immediately felt overwhelmed by its beauty. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above polished marble floors. Massive oil paintings covered the walls. Fresh flowers filled every hallway with a gentle fragrance. Staff members moved efficiently yet peacefully. No shouting. No panic. No chaos. A woman in her 60s approached with calm confidence. "You must be Grace." "Yes, ma'am. I'm Eleanor Brooks." Mrs. Brooks extended her hand warmly. "I oversee everyone who works inside this house." Grace shook it politely. "It's an honor to meet you." Mrs. Brooks smiled. "I've been here 19 years." Grace looked surprised. 19. Mrs. Brooks laughed softly. "When people are treated well, they usually stay." As they walked through the mansion, Mrs. Brooks explained everyone's responsibilities. "The kitchen staff handles meals. The grounds crew maintains the gardens. The housekeeping team rotates assignments weekly. She paused. And one more thing. Grace looked at her. If you ever make a mistake. Grace swallowed nervously. And tell the truth. I will. Mr. Carter values honesty more than perfection. Grace quietly repeated those words inside her mind. Honesty more than perfection. She hoped that would always remain true. They continued touring the mansion until they reached a pair of elegant walnut doors. Mrs. Brooks lowered her voice. This is Mr. Carter's private office. Grace nodded. No one enters without permission. Mrs. Brooks looked pleasantly surprised. Exactly. Just then, the office door opened. Ethan Carter stepped into the hallway, reviewing documents on a tablet before looking up. His expression softened immediately. You must be Grace. She straightened instinctively. Good morning, sir. Instead of merely nodding, Ethan closed the tablet. Welcome to Carter Mansion. He extended his hand. Grace hesitated. Few wealthy people had ever offered to shake her hand. She carefully accepted. His handshake was firm. Respectful. Not hurried. I hope your first day goes smoothly. Thank you, sir. I've heard good things from the employment agency. Grace smiled modestly. I'll do my best. I'm sure you will. Before walking away, Ethan turned toward Mrs. Brooks. Has HR completed the employee orientation? Not yet. Please make sure every new staff member receives the full security briefing. Of course. Grace noticed the seriousness in Ethan's voice. Security briefing. Mrs. Brooks nodded knowingly. It became mandatory several years ago. As Ethan disappeared down the hallway, Grace quietly admired the way every employee greeted him. Not with fear, but genuine respect. What she didn't know was that the upcoming orientation would introduce a small emergency feature on her work phone. A feature so ordinary it would seem forgettable. Until one desperate moment, when pressing a single button would change every life inside Carter Mansion forever. Grace watched Ethan Carter disappear down the hallway before finally letting out the breath she had been holding. Mrs. Eleanor Brooks noticed the expression on the young woman's face and smiled. He's not what most people expect from a billionaire, is he? Grace shook her head. No, ma'am. What were you expecting? Grace hesitated, unsure whether she should answer honestly. I thought, she said quietly, I thought he wouldn't even notice someone like me. Mrs. Brooks chuckled. That's exactly why so many people respect him. They continued walking through the mansion, while sunlight streamed through enormous windows overlooking acres of landscaped gardens. This house employs nearly 80 full-time staff, Mrs. Brooks explained. Housekeepers, chefs, drivers, gardeners, security officers, maintenance technicians, accountants, assistants, you name it. Grace looked around in amazement. It must be difficult managing everyone. It can be, Mrs. Brooks admitted, but people usually cooperate because Mr. Carter expects professionalism from everyone. She paused for a moment before adding thoughtfully, well, almost everyone. Grace noticed the slight change in her tone, but wisely chose not to ask questions. Some answers revealed themselves only with time. As they reached the staff wing, several employees greeted Mrs. Brooks warmly. Morning, Mrs. Brooks. Good morning. Who's the new recruit? This is Grace. One by one, they introduced themselves. Chef Daniel. Housekeeper Linda. Groundskeeper Samuel. Laundry Supervisor Carol. Every greeting felt sincere. Grace immediately sensed something unusual. Despite working inside one of the wealthiest homes in America, the staff behaved more like a close-knit family than frightened employees. That atmosphere hadn't happened by accident. Years earlier, after discovering how his own mother had been abused behind closed doors, Ethan had quietly restructured every company he owned. Anonymous reporting systems were installed. Random employee interviews became routine. Executives were evaluated not only by financial results, but also by how their subordinates described working under them. Most people believed those policies were simply good management. Only Ethan knew they were born from grief. Mrs. Brooks finally led Grace into the Human Resources office, located near the rear of the mansion. A friendly HR manager named Rebecca stood to welcome her. "Grace Johnson." "Yes." Rebecca smiled. "Congratulations again." She handed Grace a folder containing employment forms, emergency contacts, confidentiality agreements, and company policies. Most new employees skimmed through them. Grace read every page carefully. Rebecca noticed. Not many people actually read those. Grace smiled. "My mother always said reading first saves trouble later." Rebecca laughed. "Wise woman." Grace's smile faded ever so slightly. "My mom was." Rebecca immediately understood. "I'm sorry." Grace nodded politely. "It's okay." The silence that followed carried the weight of losses neither woman needed to explain. After completing the paperwork, Rebecca reached into a drawer and removed a company-issued smartphone. "This phone stays with you whenever you're on duty." Grace looked surprised. "A work phone?" Rebecca nodded. "It connects you directly to supervisors, maintenance, housekeeping schedules, and emergency services." She powered on the device. There are also panic features built into it. Grace looked confused. "Panic features?" Rebecca tapped several icons. "If you're injured." She demonstrated the first button. "Or there's a fire." She demonstrated another. "Or you ever feel physically threatened while on company property." She pressed a small red icon labeled Emergency Upload. This automatically backs up whatever your phone is recording to Carter Global's encrypted security server and immediately alerts the head of security. Grace blinked. "Even if the phone gets destroyed?" Rebecca smiled. "Exactly. Has anyone ever needed it?" Rebecca exchanged a quick glance with Mrs. Brooks. "Not since it was introduced." Grace nodded. "I hope I never have to use it." "So do we." The orientation continued, and soon Grace was shown how to use the scheduling software, staff communication system, and security access badges. Everything felt remarkably organized. Yet one detail quietly caught her attention. Every security camera inside the mansion appeared modern. Except several locations shown on the digital floor plan, displayed small gray circles marked inactive. Grace frowned. "Excuse me." Rebecca looked over. "Yes." "Why are some cameras inactive?" Rebecca answered before thinking. "They're waiting for maintenance." Mrs. Brooks looked briefly toward Rebecca. A strange silence filled the room. Only for a second. Then Rebecca quickly smiled again. "They'll probably be replaced soon." Grace accepted the explanation. But somewhere deep inside, something didn't quite feel right. It was a tiny inconsistency. Easy to overlook. Exactly the kind that later becomes impossible to forget. By lunchtime, Grace had completed her orientation and officially joined the housekeeping team. Mrs. Brooks handed her a small schedule. You'll spend the next few days learning the mansion before taking on independent assignments. Grace nodded gratefully. I won't let you down. I don't think you will. As Grace walked toward the hallway, neither woman noticed someone standing just beyond the partially open doorway. Victoria Blake. She had heard enough. A new maid. Well-educated. Observant. Someone who noticed inactive cameras during her very first morning. Victoria's pleasant smile never disappeared. But inside, a single thought quietly formed. This one notices too much. She turned gracefully and walked away before anyone realized she had been listening. Upstairs, sunlight reflected off the diamond engagement ring on her finger. She admired it for a brief moment, then whispered almost inaudibly, "Don't worry. No one is going to ruin my future." Far below, Grace happily folded her orientation folder, completely unaware that the woman she had never officially met had already decided she was becoming a problem. Grace's first afternoon inside Carter Mansion passed more smoothly than she had dared to imagine. Mrs. Brooks assigned her to work alongside Linda, one of the senior housekeepers, so she could learn the routines before taking on responsibilities alone. "Take your time," Linda said warmly as they walked toward the East Wing. "Nobody expects you to memorize a place this size in one day." Grace smiled. "I'm trying not to get lost." Linda laughed. "You will." Grace looked worried. "Everyone does." The two women shared a laugh before beginning their work. Unlike the offices Grace had cleaned in the past, every room inside Carter Mansion felt personal. Family photographs rested on shelves beside priceless artwork. Fresh flowers decorated nearly every corner. Books lined the walls of the private library, many of them well-read rather than simply displayed. Grace quietly dusted a bookshelf before stopping in front of a framed photograph. It showed Ethan Carter standing beside an older woman with kind eyes. His mother. Even through the photograph, the warmth between them was unmistakable. Linda noticed where Grace was looking. "Mrs. Margaret Carter." Grace turned toward her. "Mr. Carter's mother." Linda nodded. "He adored her." Grace carefully returned the photograph to its exact position. "What happened?" Linda's smile faded. "She passed away about 10 years ago." Grace lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." "So was he." Linda hesitated before continuing. "I've worked here long enough to remember what he was like afterward." She gently folded a dust cloth in her hands. "For months he blamed himself." Grace looked surprised. "Why?" He discovered people he trusted hadn't been treating his mother the way they pretended to. Grace felt a chill run through her. Linda continued quietly. "After that, he changed. He became stricter." "No." Linda shook her head. "He became kinder." Grace frowned slightly. "Kinder?" He said if people could mistreat a helpless old woman while smiling to his face, then anyone could hide behind good manners. Grace silently absorbed those words. Without realizing it, she had just learned the emotional foundation that shaped the entire Carter household. Far away, in another part of the mansion, Victoria Blake sat with Miranda in the sunroom, overlooking the gardens. Wedding magazines lay scattered across a marble coffee table. Florists had sent samples. Designers waited for approval. Every detail of the upcoming engagement gala was being discussed. "It has to be perfect," Miranda said. "It will be." Victoria casually stirred her tea. "Ethan trusts me." Miranda studied her daughter carefully. "Trust is valuable." Victoria smiled. "So is ownership." Miranda leaned forward. You've checked with Daniel. Victoria nodded. He knows exactly which documents Ethan will be encouraged to sign after the gala. And the attorney. He'll be there. Miranda relaxed. Good. Neither woman noticed one of the gardeners working just outside the open windows. Old Samuel couldn't hear every word. Only fragments. Documents. Attorney. Sign. He frowned for only a moment before returning to trimming the rose bushes. The conversation seemed harmless. Still, something about Victoria's tone unsettled him. Years of working around people had taught Samuel that danger often wore expensive clothes and spoke with perfect manners. It was only a passing thought, but one worth remembering. Back inside the mansion, Grace continued learning the layout. She polished handrails, organized guest rooms, helped prepare fresh linens. The work was demanding, yet everyone treated her with patience. As afternoon sunlight filled the hallways, Mrs. Brooks approached. Grace. Yes, ma'am. I'd like you to deliver these fresh towels to the West Wing. Grace accepted the neatly folded stack. I can do that. The guest rooms are empty, so take your time. Grace thanked her and headed upstairs. The West Wing was noticeably quieter. The polished wooden floors muffled her footsteps as she walked toward the guest suites. Just as she reached the hallway, a nearby office door opened. Victoria Blake stepped out. For the first time, the two women stood face to face. Victoria offered a dazzling smile. You must be the new maid. Grace immediately lowered her eyes respectfully. Yes, ma'am. I'm Grace. Victoria slowly looked her up and down. Her smile never changed. Welcome. Thank you. I've heard wonderful things about you already. Grace looked surprised. You have. Mrs. Brooks says you're hardworking. I'll do my best. I'm sure you will. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Perfectly polite. Perfectly normal. Yet as Victoria walked away, she glanced back only once. Her eyes briefly settled on the work phone clipped neatly to Grace's uniform. Then they moved toward the security camera mounted at the end of the hallway. Just for a second. Then she smiled again and continued walking. Grace never noticed the glance. But readers did. It was another tiny piece of foreshadowing. A woman doesn't casually check camera positions unless cameras matter to her. Moments later, Grace finished arranging the guest rooms. As she exited the hallway, she noticed something unusual. The security camera Victoria had glanced toward. Its tiny indicator light wasn't blinking. Grace paused. She had seen enough cameras in office buildings to know active systems usually displayed a faint green light. This one was dark. She looked at it for another second, then quietly continued walking. It wasn't her job to inspect security equipment. At least, not yet. From the balcony above, Victoria watched Grace disappear around the corner. A slow smile spread across her face. Curious girls, she whispered to herself. They always become difficult. Downstairs, Ethan's black sedan pulled into the driveway after finishing a morning of meetings. He stepped out, unaware that his fiancée had just met the young woman whose courage would eventually expose every lie she had spent years building. The clock had started ticking. Neither of them knew it. The low hum of Ethan Carter's luxury sedan echoed through the circular driveway as it came to a smooth stop beneath the towering marble entrance of Carter Mansion. A chauffeur hurried to open the rear door. Welcome back, Mr. Carter. Thank you, James. Ethan stepped out, loosening his tie as he looked toward the sprawling gardens. Although he had spent the morning closing a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that would make headlines across the financial world, his attention wasn't on business. It was on home. Unlike many billionaires who treated their mansions as status symbols, Ethan wanted Carter Mansion to feel like a sanctuary. It was the last place where memories of his parents still lived. Every portrait, every antique clock, every tree his mother had planted carried a story. His late father had built wealth. His late mother had taught him what wealth was for. As he climbed the front steps, he noticed old Samuel kneeling beside a flower bed, carefully trimming roses. "They're blooming early this year," Ethan remarked. Samuel looked up with a smile. "Your mother's favorite roses always do, sir." For a brief moment, Ethan stood silently. A flash of memory crossed his mind. He was 24 again, watching his mother kneel in this very garden with dirt on her gloves, laughing because she insisted expensive gardeners couldn't understand flowers the way people who truly loved them could. The memory disappeared as quickly as it came. But the ache remained. "Thank you for taking such good care of them," Ethan said quietly. Samuel nodded. "I promised Mrs. Carter I always would." Neither man realized someone was watching them from an upstairs window. Victoria. Her smile faded the moment Ethan disappeared inside. She had never understood why he spent time talking to gardeners, drivers, and maids. To her, kindness toward employees wasn't admirable. It was weakness. "A billionaire shouldn't know a gardener's name," she muttered under her breath. Miranda, standing nearby, overheard her. "Don't try to change that part of him." Victoria turned. "I'm not." "Good." Miranda's voice was calm. "People trust him because of that reputation. We benefit from it." Victoria slowly nodded. "For now." Downstairs, Ethan entered the mansion, greeting employees as he walked through the foyer. "Good afternoon, Carol." "Welcome back, sir." "Daniel, something smells incredible." The head chef laughed. "Fresh herb-crusted salmon." "I'll be looking forward to dinner." Grace watched quietly from across the hallway while polishing a console table. She had never seen someone with enormous wealth acknowledge every employee so naturally. There was no performance, no cameras, no audience. It simply seemed to be who he was. Mrs. Brooks noticed Grace watching. "I told you." Grace nodded. "You did." Just then, Ethan glanced in their direction. "Grace." She immediately straightened. "Yes, sir." "How's your first day treating you?" She smiled nervously. "It's been wonderful. No one's worked you too hard." A few nearby employees chuckled. Grace laughed softly. "Not yet." "Good. If you need anything, Mrs. Brooks knows how to reach me." "Thank you, sir." As Ethan continued upstairs toward his office, Grace couldn't help smiling. For the first time since her parents died, working didn't feel like surviving. It almost felt safe. But safety inside Carter Mansion was becoming an illusion. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Brooks assigned Grace to help organize storage cabinets near the West Wing. The hallway was unusually quiet. Most employees had already moved to other sections of the mansion. As Grace sorted fresh linens, muffled voices drifted from behind a partially closed office door nearby. She wasn't trying to listen. The voices simply carried through the silent hallway. One belonged to Victoria. The other, Miranda. The attorney already agreed. Grace froze. She had no idea who they were discussing. Miranda spoke next. "You still need Ethan's signature." "I'll get it." "What about the trust documents?" Victoria answered confidently. He never reads everything before signing when he's preparing for events. Miranda sounded pleased. Perfect. Grace frowned. She didn't understand what the conversation meant. It sounded like ordinary wedding planning. Trust. Attorney. Documents. Nothing illegal. Nothing alarming. Still, something about Victoria's tone made her uncomfortable. It wasn't affectionate. It wasn't excited. It sounded calculated. Grace quietly picked up her basket and walked away before hearing anything more. Inside the office, Victoria suddenly stopped speaking. What is it? Miranda asked. Victoria glanced toward the door. I thought I heard something. She opened it. The hallway was empty. Grace had already turned the corner. Victoria's eyes slowly scanned both directions before closing the door again. She didn't know whether anyone had overheard them. But from that moment, she became much more careful and much more observant. That evening, Grace clocked out and boarded the bus home. Marcus was waiting by the apartment window when she arrived. The moment she walked through the door, he grinned. So, Grace laughed. I got through my first day. Told you. She handed him a small paper bag. What's this? Dinner. His smile disappeared. You bought food. I wanted to celebrate. Marcus looked at the restaurant logo. This must have cost. It doesn't matter. He hugged her tightly. One day, he whispered, I'll take care of you instead. Grace smiled, blinking back tears. You already do. Outside their apartment, an old streetlight flickered as night settled over the neighborhood. Miles away, inside Carter Mansion, Victoria stood alone in front of a mirror, slowly removing her diamond earrings. Her reflection smiled back, but her eyes remained cold. She quietly opened a locked drawer. Inside lay a leather folder marked with Ethan Carter's name. Beneath it, several legal documents, some genuine, some expertly forged. She gently ran her fingers across the folder before whispering, just a few more weeks. Everything you've spent your life building will belong to me. She closed the drawer, locked it, and smiled. She had no idea. A quiet young maid had already heard just enough to begin unraveling the perfect future she believed was guaranteed. The next morning, Carter Mansion awakened with the quiet rhythm of practiced perfection. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifted from the kitchen. Garden sprinklers hissed across the emerald lawns while chauffeurs lined up luxury vehicles for the day's appointments. Inside, the staff moved with calm precision, each person knowing exactly where they needed to be. Grace Johnson arrived 20 minutes early. She wanted to make a good impression. Mrs. Brooks noticed her entering through the staff entrance and smiled. You're early again. Grace laughed softly. My father always said if you're on time, you're already late. Mrs. Brooks nodded approvingly. He sounds like a wise man. He was. As Grace tied on her apron, a brief flashback surfaced in her mind. She was only 12 years old, watching her father lace up his worn work boots before sunrise. He would always kneel, smile, and remind her that your name becomes your reputation long before people know your face. She had carried those words through every hardship since his death. She never imagined they would become one of the reasons Ethan Carter would eventually trust her. After receiving her assignments for the day, Grace began cleaning the upstairs family lounge. The room overlooked the eastern gardens, where sunlight reflected beautifully across a small lake beyond the trees. As she dusted the bookshelves, she noticed several framed photographs. One showed Ethan receiving a humanitarian award. Another captured him opening a children's hospital wing. A third showed him sitting on the grass with employees' children during the company's annual family picnic. There were no staged poses, only genuine smiles. Grace couldn't help whispering to herself, maybe good people really do become successful. She didn't know someone had heard her. Ethan had entered quietly from the adjoining hallway while reviewing emails on his tablet. He looked up. What was that? Grace startled. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. You don't have to apologize. She smiled nervously. I was just saying. She hesitated. I've never worked for someone who seems to care this much about people. Ethan looked at the photographs for a moment. My mother believed kindness was an investment. Grace listened quietly. She used to tell me that money can build buildings. He gently touched one of the picture frames. But only character builds homes. For a brief second, both of them stood silently. Neither realized someone else had witnessed the entire exchange. Victoria, standing farther down the hallway, watching. Her smile remained in place, but inside irritation simmered. He's talking to a maid. Not because Grace had done anything wrong, but because Ethan rarely took time from his schedule unless he found someone trustworthy. Victoria didn't like that. Trust made people dangerous, especially honest people. She quietly walked away before either of them noticed her. Later that afternoon, the mansion buzzed with activity as preparations for the upcoming engagement gala intensified. Wedding planners carried fabric samples through the halls. Florists delivered extravagant arrangements. Security consultants inspected entrances. Lawyers arrived for scheduled meetings. Grace spent most of the afternoon helping organize guest suites for visiting executives and family members. Everything seemed normal, until she was sent to the West Wing to replace fresh flowers. As she approached one of the private conference rooms, she heard raised voices. Not shouting, but tense. The door wasn't fully closed. She never intended to eavesdrop. She simply slowed when she recognized Victoria's voice. I told you, Victoria said sharply. The originals stay where they are until after the engagement. A man's voice answered. If Carter reviews the file himself. He won't. But if he does, he trusts me. Grace frowned. Originals. File. The conversation made little sense. Then Miranda spoke. We're too close now to make mistakes. The room fell silent. Grace quietly continued walking. She had heard enough to know she shouldn't have heard anything at all. She reached the guest suite, replaced the flowers, and tried to forget the conversation. But her instincts refused to let it go. There had been something unsettling about the confidence in Victoria's voice. It wasn't the confidence of someone planning a wedding. It sounded like someone executing a strategy. That evening, while most employees prepared to leave, old Samuel found Grace watering flowers near the rear courtyard. You've been quiet today, he observed. Grace smiled faintly. Just tired. Samuel nodded. Be careful. She looked up. Careful. He glanced toward the mansion before lowering his voice. I've worked here a long time. Grace waited. Sometimes the most beautiful flowers hide the sharpest thorns. Before Grace could ask what he meant, Samuel simply picked up his gardening tools and walked away. She watched him disappear into the fading evening light. His words lingered in her thoughts. Back inside the mansion, Victoria stood alone in Ethan's private study. She wore thin black leather gloves. She quietly opened one drawer, then another. Finally, she removed a sealed folder. Inside were corporate trust documents, She photographed several pages with her phone before carefully returning everything exactly as she had found it. She closed the drawer, straightened the papers, adjusted the chair, removed a tiny speck of dust from the desk, then quietly left the room. Outside the office, she slipped off the gloves and placed them inside her designer handbag. The gloves, the secret meetings, the forged documents, the inactive cameras, the attorney. Each clue seemed small on its own. Together, they were slowly forming a picture Grace hadn't yet seen, but one she would soon stumble into. And when she did, Victoria Blake would decide there was only one way to protect everything she had spent years manipulating. Silence the only witness. 3 days passed. Grace Johnson settled into the rhythm of Carter Mansion, but something had changed inside her. The excitement of landing her dream job had slowly given way to an uncomfortable feeling she couldn't explain. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was the quiet sense that pieces of a puzzle were appearing before her, but she couldn't see the full picture. Every now and then, she'd remember the conversations she'd accidentally overheard. The originals stay where they are. He trusts me. The attorney. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they refused to leave her mind. Still, Grace reminded herself of something her mother used to say. Never accuse someone because your imagination is louder than your evidence. So she buried the thoughts and focused on her work. That Friday morning, Carter Mansion was unusually busy. Luxury SUVs arrived one after another. Wedding planners carried expensive fabrics through the front entrance. A renowned florist delivered white orchids flown in from Singapore. Security personnel tested communication radios. The engagement gala was only a little over 2 weeks away, and every department was working overtime. Mrs. Brooks handed Grace a clipboard. "I need fresh towels taken to the executive conference rooms." "Yes, ma'am." And afterward, clean the private sitting room near Mr. Carter's study. Grace accepted the card. "I'll take care of it." As she pushed the linen cart through the west wing, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. 2 unfamiliar men wearing expensive suits entered a private conference room. One carried a black leather briefcase. The other wore a silver watch worth more than Grace's yearly salary. Neither looked like wedding planners. They looked like lawyers. Moments later, Victoria Blake entered the same room. She looked over both shoulders before quietly closing the door behind her. Grace continued walking. It wasn't her business. She reminded herself of that repeatedly. She delivered towels to 3 guest suites before returning toward the conference rooms. Just as she passed, the conference room door suddenly swung open. One of the suited men stepped outside to answer a phone call. Grace politely lowered her eyes and kept walking. When the man moved farther down the hallway, voices drifted through the partially open door. She wasn't trying to listen. The hallway simply amplified every word. Miranda Blake spoke first. "The wedding must happen exactly as planned." "It will," Victoria answered confidently. "The trust transfer documents. They're ready." Grace slowed unconsciously. "Trust transfer." The older male voice spoke next. "There's still one problem." Victoria frowned. "What?" "Ethan's father's original will." The hallway suddenly felt colder. Miranda's voice sharpened. "It was supposed to disappear years ago." "It almost did," the lawyer replied. "But the original wasn't destroyed." Grace froze. She had no idea why the conversation suddenly felt dangerous. The lawyer continued. "The original will contains a clause. What clause? Victoria demanded. If Ethan discovers it before signing the new trust agreement. The man hesitated. Your control of Carter Global becomes impossible. Silence. Then Victoria spoke so softly Grace barely heard her. Then he must never see it. Grace's heartbeat quickened. She didn't understand corporate law. She didn't know what trust agreements or original wills really meant. But one thing was painfully obvious. Someone inside that room wanted to keep Ethan from learning something important. The lawyer lowered his voice further. I still think this is risky. Victoria laughed. Risky? I've spent 4 years earning Ethan's complete trust. He signs what I place in front of him. And after the engagement gala, she smiled. Everything changes. Grace's breathing became shallow. She suddenly realized she shouldn't be hearing any of this. She quietly reached for her card. At that exact moment, one of its wheels rolled over a loose strip of decorative flooring. Clicking. The sound echoed through the hallway. Inside the conference room, every voice stopped. Grace's eyes widened. Oh no! The conference room door opened. Victoria stepped into the hallway. Her elegant smile remained perfectly in place. But her eyes searched the hallway with terrifying precision. Grace quickly bent beside her cart, pretending to rearrange folded towels. Victoria walked toward her. Grace. Grace looked up politely. Yes, ma'am. Were you standing here long? Grace forced herself to remain calm. I was delivering towels. Victoria studied her face. For several uncomfortable seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Victoria smiled. I see. I hope I wasn't in the way. Not at all. Victoria gently brushed an invisible piece of lint from Grace's shoulder. The gesture appeared friendly, almost affectionate. But Grace felt strangely uneasy. You seem like a very honest girl, Victoria said. I try to be. Good. Victoria's smile deepened. Honest people usually live peaceful lives. She paused. As long as they mind their own business. Grace felt a chill travel down her spine. Before she could respond, Victoria turned gracefully and walked back into the conference room. The door closed. Grace stood frozen. Had that been a warning? Or was she imagining things? She pushed her cart away, trying to convince herself she was overthinking everything. From the second-floor balcony above, old Samuel happened to witness the brief exchange. He couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw one thing that troubled him deeply. Grace walked away looking frightened. Victoria watched her leave, without smiling. For the first time since Grace arrived at Carter Mansion, Samuel felt something he couldn't explain. A feeling that the young maid had unknowingly stepped into the middle of something far bigger than herself. And somewhere inside the conference room, Victoria quietly looked toward the closed door. Her pleasant expression disappeared. She turned to the lawyer. I think, she said calmly, our new maid may have heard more than she should. The room fell silent. No one laughed. No one dismissed her concern. Because every person inside that room understood one terrifying truth. A single witness could destroy everything. If your heart is pounding right now and you believe Grace doesn't deserve to be caught in this nightmare, take 1 second to subscribe to the channel and comment below telling us where you're watching from. I want to know which city and country is standing with Grace today. Because what happens next will change every life inside Carter Mansion. Grace Johnson spent the entire weekend trying to convince herself she had imagined the warning. Honest people usually live peaceful lives, as long as they mind their own business. Victoria had spoken those words with a smile so gentle that anyone watching would have thought she was complimenting the young maid. But Grace couldn't forget her eyes. They hadn't smiled. Monday morning arrived with clear blue skies, yet an uneasy feeling followed Grace all the way to Carter Mansion. The closer the bus came to the estate, the tighter her chest became. She hated the feeling. She had always trusted her instincts. When her father was alive, he often reminded her that fear and intuition were not the same thing. Fear makes you run from everything, he used to tell her while teaching her to ride a bicycle. But intuition whispers only when something is truly wrong. Learn the difference, Grace. As the mansion's gates came into view, those words echoed in her mind. She silently prayed she was wrong. Inside Carter Mansion, preparations for the engagement gala had become even more intense. Workers carried grand floral arrangements into the ballroom. Electricians adjusted crystal chandeliers. Designers measured curtains. Luxury caterers sampled menus. Every hallway buzzed with excitement. Only Ethan seemed remarkably calm. He stood in the foyer reviewing blueprints for a new children's hospital, his foundation planned to build. When Grace entered through the staff entrance, he happened to look up. "Good morning, Grace." She smiled politely. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. How was your weekend?" "It was nice." "What did you do?" She laughed softly. "I helped my little brother study for his science test." Ethan smiled. "How old is he?" 14. "I hope he does well. He studied all weekend. I'm sure he'll make you proud." The conversation lasted barely a minute. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing remarkable. But from across the foyer, Victoria watched every second. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had begun noticing a pattern. Ethan rarely remembered new employees' names so quickly. He rarely asked personal questions. He certainly didn't stop to chat during busy mornings. Grace wasn't doing anything wrong. That was precisely the problem. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't trying to impress Ethan. She was simply being herself. And genuine people were much harder to manipulate. Victoria slowly looked away before anyone noticed her watching. Later that morning, Mrs. Brooks assigned Grace to polish several display cabinets in the East Gallery. The room housed priceless antiques collected by Ethan's parents over 3 decades. Every item had to be cleaned with extraordinary care. Grace worked slowly, making sure nothing was damaged. About an hour later, Linda entered carrying fresh polishing cloths. "You've got visitors." Grace looked confused. "Visitors?" Linda smiled. "Your biggest fans." Grace laughed. "I don't have fans." Linda pointed toward the doorway. Marcus stood there holding a lunch bag, grinning from ear to ear. Grace's eyes lit up. "Marcus." He hurried over. "I forgot your lunch." She accepted the bag. "You came all this way. You forgot it on the kitchen table." She laughed. "I guess first-week nerves." Mrs. Brooks walked over smiling. "This must be your brother." Marcus nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Brooks extended her hand. "I'm Eleanor Brooks." Marcus shook it respectfully. "It's nice to meet you." Grace couldn't hide her pride. Her brother had always been polite. Their parents had made sure of that. Mrs. Brooks noticed. "You've raised a good young man." Grace smiled sadly. "We've raised each other." Before leaving, Marcus turned toward his sister. "Don't skip lunch." "I won't." "You promise." "I promise." He waved goodbye and disappeared through the staff entrance. Unbeknownst to either sibling, Someone had been watching the entire exchange from the second-floor balcony. Victoria. She watched until Marcus disappeared beyond the gates. Then she quietly asked one of the household assistants, "Who was that boy?" "The new maid's younger brother." Victoria continued watching through the window. "Does she have any other family?" "I don't think so." Victoria nodded once. "Thank you." She walked away without another word. But a thought had already taken root. Everyone, no matter how brave, had a weakness. She simply needed to discover Grace's. That afternoon, Grace received her first independent assignment. Mrs. Brooks handed her a small brass key. Mr. Carter asked for his private reading room to be cleaned before tonight. Grace looked surprised. "His private reading room?" Mrs. Brooks nodded. "He spends a lot of time there." "I'll be careful." "I know you will." Grace entered the elegant room, amazed by thousands of books lining floor-to-ceiling shelves. The air smelled faintly of cedar wood and old paper. Family photographs rested between first-edition novels. One picture caught her attention. It showed Ethan and his father cutting the ribbon at Carter Global's very first warehouse. Both men were covered in dust. Both were laughing. Another photograph showed Ethan sitting beside his mother in a hospital garden. She looked frail, but happy. Grace smiled gently. This family really loved each other. As she dusted a nearby bookshelf, something slipped from between two books and landed softly on the carpet. A folded piece of paper. Grace immediately bent to pick it up. She never intended to read it. She simply wanted to return it to its place. But before she could, the door opened. Victoria stood there. Her eyes dropped instantly to the paper in Grace's hand. For the first time since they met, Victoria didn't bother smiling. "What?" she asked quietly. "Are you holding?" Grace's heart skipped. "It's just..." She unfolded it instinctively. Her eyes widened. It wasn't an ordinary note. It appeared to be part of a legal document. Before Grace could read more than a single line, Victoria crossed the room with frightening speed and snatched it from her hands. Her fingers gripped the paper so tightly that the edges crumpled. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Grace had never seen Victoria move like that before. A second later, Victoria forced another smile. "Oh," she laughed softly. "I've been looking everywhere for this." Grace apologized immediately. "I'm sorry it fell from the shelf." "I know." Victoria carefully folded the paper. "No harm done." Her voice sounded pleasant again. "Too pleasant." Grace nodded. "I'll finish cleaning." Victoria stared at her for several long seconds. Then she slowly slipped the document into her designer handbag. As she walked toward the door, she paused without turning around. "I've always believed curiosity," she spoke almost in a whisper, "has a way of changing people's lives." She left. The door clicked shut behind her. Grace stood motionless. Something inside her whispered that the paper hadn't belonged in Victoria's handbag. And something else, something even quieter, warned her that from this moment forward, Victoria Blake would never look at her the same way again. Grace stood alone in Ethan Carter's private reading room long after Victoria left. The silence felt heavier than before. She replayed the encounter in her mind again and again. Victoria had crossed the room far too quickly, almost as though she had been afraid Grace might read something. Grace frowned. "It isn't my place to question it." She finished dusting the shelves, carefully arranged every book exactly as she had found it, and quietly left the room. She had no intention of involving herself in matters that didn't concern her. Unfortunately, someone else had already decided that Grace was involved. Victoria closed the reading room door behind her and walked briskly toward the private elevator reserved for the family. The pleasant smile vanished from her face. By the time the elevator doors closed, there wasn't a trace of warmth left in her expression. She removed the folded document from her handbag. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, from anger. "That was too close," she muttered. Minutes later, she entered Miranda Blake's private suite. Miranda looked up from her laptop. "What happened?" Victoria tossed the folded paper onto the coffee table. "The maid found it." Miranda's face hardened. "Did she read it?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" "It slipped out of one of Ethan's books." Miranda stood immediately. "I told you those pages shouldn't be left anywhere outside the safe." Victoria folded her arms. "I recovered it." "That's not the point." Miranda lowered her voice. "One mistake is all it takes." Victoria remained calm. She only saw the first page. "Are you certain?" Victoria hesitated. That tiny hesitation told Miranda everything. "No." Miranda sighed deeply. "Then from this moment forward, you watch her." Meanwhile, Ethan spent the afternoon in the executive boardroom, with senior executives discussing a billion-dollar renewable energy acquisition. Financial projections filled the enormous digital screens. Board members debated numbers. Lawyers reviewed contracts. Yet despite the scale of the meeting, Ethan's attention drifted. During a short break, his chief financial officer smiled. "You've been distracted all afternoon." Ethan chuckled. "Wedding planning." The room laughed. "I've learned one thing." "What's that?" another executive asked. "Merging billion-dollar companies is easier than choosing flower arrangements." Everyone laughed again. No one noticed the sadness that briefly crossed Ethan's face. Marriage, family, trust. Those words meant far more to him than business ever could. He believed he had finally found someone with the same values his mother had carried. He had no idea that while he defended Victoria's character in boardrooms, she was quietly building a trap beneath his feet. Back inside Carter Mansion, Grace finished organizing the linen inventory before preparing to leave for the evening. As she opened her locker, she froze. Her small handbag had been emptied. Everything lay scattered across the shelf. Wallet, notebook, photographs, bus pass, pens. Even the emergency money she kept hidden inside an old envelope had been unfolded and searched. Her breathing quickened. She looked around. Linda, the senior housekeeper, walked over. "What's wrong?" "My locker." Linda frowned. "What happened?" "Someone went through my things." Linda examined the locker carefully. "There are no signs of forced entry." Grace looked confused. "But I locked it." Mrs. Brooks arrived moments later. "What happened?" Grace explained quietly. Mrs. Brooks immediately ordered everyone to stop working. "No one leaves until we figure this out." Every employee gathered in the staff room. One by one, they confirmed they hadn't touched Grace's locker. No one had seen anything unusual. Mrs. Brooks looked genuinely troubled. "This has never happened before." Grace tried forcing a smile. "It's okay." "No." Mrs. Brooks shook her head firmly. "It isn't." She turned toward the security office. I want the hallway footage reviewed. Grace felt relieved. At least the cameras would reveal the truth. 20 minutes later, the head of security returned carrying a tablet. His expression wasn't reassuring. Mrs. Brooks immediately stood. Well, he looked uncomfortable. The camera outside the staff lockers. He paused. It was offline. Grace stared at him. Offline. For maintenance. Mrs. Brooks frowned. Again. The security chief nodded. It stopped recording yesterday afternoon. Grace felt her stomach tighten. Yesterday. Another inactive camera. Just like the one outside the West Wing. Just like the gray markers she'd noticed during orientation. A quiet memory surfaced. Victoria's eyes. Glancing toward cameras. The conversation she'd overheard. The warning. Honest people usually live peaceful lives, as long as they mind their own business. For the first time, the separate pieces began connecting. Not completely, but enough to frighten her. That evening, after everyone left, old Samuel found Grace waiting at the bus stop outside the estate. You look troubled. Grace forced a smile. I'm all right. Samuel looked at her for several seconds. No. He gently shook his head. You aren't. She remained silent. Samuel sat beside her on the wooden bench. I've spent 40 years growing roses. Grace looked puzzled. What does that have to do with anything? The healthiest-looking roses. He looked toward the mansion gates. Sometimes have rot hidden beneath the soil. Grace quietly listened. You won't see it. You won't smell it. But if you ignore the signs, one morning the whole garden begins dying. Grace understood he wasn't talking about flowers anymore. She lowered her voice. Mr. Samuel, have you ever felt like something wasn't right here? Samuel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly reached into his pocket. He removed a tiny brass key. This opens the old maintenance office in the basement. Grace looked confused. Why are you giving it to me? I didn't say I was. He closed his hand around the key again. I just wanted you to know. Some answers aren't kept in offices. They're hidden where people stop looking. Before Grace could ask another question, her bus arrived. Samuel stood. We'll talk another day. He watched the bus pull away. His weathered face filled with concern. Because deep inside, he had begun fearing the young woman wasn't simply in danger of losing her job. She was becoming a threat to someone capable of doing far worse. The following Tuesday began with an uneasy silence. Grace Johnson barely slept the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, the events of the previous afternoon replayed in her mind. Her locker had been searched. Another security camera had mysteriously been under maintenance. Victoria had taken the legal document from her hands with a desperation that no ordinary person would have shown. And old Samuel. He hadn't spoken like a gardener. He had spoken like a man who had survived something terrible. Grace sat on the early morning bus, staring out the window without really seeing the passing streets. Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. Marcus, good luck today. Don't forget to smile. Grace smiled despite herself. She replied, Grace, always. Eat breakfast before school. A second later, 3 blue heart emojis appeared. Grace chuckled quietly. No matter how difficult life became, Marcus somehow found a way to remind her what she was fighting for. She slipped the phone into her bag. She had no idea that before the day ended, someone else would learn exactly who Marcus was. Inside Carter Mansion, Victoria Blake stood before the mirror in her dressing room while a stylist adjusted her hair. Luxury fashion magazines lay scattered across the vanity. A custom-made engagement gown hung nearby beneath protective covers. Everything was progressing exactly as planned. Everything. Except Grace. Victoria dismissed the stylist. "I'll finish the rest myself." Once the room emptied, Miranda entered and quietly locked the door. "Have you decided?" Victoria nodded. "She's becoming a liability." Miranda crossed her arms. "Then remove the problem." "I'm working on it." "You should have done it the day she overheard us." Victoria looked toward the window. "I wanted to know how much she heard." "And?" Victoria's expression darkened. "Enough." Miranda remained silent. Victoria continued. "She notices details. The cameras. The documents. The meetings. People like Grace are dangerous." Miranda spoke calmly. "Not because they're clever." Victoria nodded. "Because they're honest." Honest people didn't need lies to destroy carefully built deceptions. They only needed the truth. Meanwhile, Ethan arrived home earlier than expected after a morning meeting was canceled. As he entered the foyer, he found Mrs. Brooks reviewing seating charts for the engagement gala. "Everything under control." Mrs. Brooks smiled. "As much as possible." Ethan laughed. "I appreciate all the extra work." She hesitated before speaking. "May I mention something, sir?" "Of course." "It's about Grace." Ethan looked up. "What about her?" "She's been unusually distracted since yesterday." Ethan frowned. "Did something happen?" Mrs. Brooks briefly explained the incident involving Grace's locker. Ethan's expression immediately changed. "And the cameras?" "The hallway camera happened to be offline." "Happened to?" Mrs. Brooks noticed his tone. "That's what security reported." Ethan remained quiet for several seconds. Then he said something that caught her by surprise. "I want a complete report on every inactive camera inside this house." Mrs. Brooks blinked. "I'll notify security." "No." Ethan shook his head. "I'll handle it personally." As he walked away, an old memory surfaced. Years earlier, the nursing home security manager had also claimed cameras were under maintenance. That excuse had delayed the discovery of what happened to his mother. Ever since then, broken cameras had never felt like simple coincidences. Later that afternoon, Grace was asked to retrieve decorative candle holders from one of the mansion's storage basements. The basement was quiet, cool, dimly lit. Rows of shelves stretched into the distance. As she searched for the labeled boxes, her eyes landed on an old wooden door tucked behind stacks of unused furniture. A faded metal sign still hung above it. "Maintenance office." Grace stopped. Samuel's words echoed inside her mind. Some answers aren't kept in offices. They're hidden where people stop looking. Her heartbeat quickened. She wasn't looking for trouble. She only wanted the candle holders. But curiosity tugged at her. She slowly walked toward the old door. It was locked. She stared at it for several long seconds, then quietly walked away. Not today. She had promised herself she wouldn't interfere in matters that weren't hers. Yet as she climbed back upstairs, she never noticed someone watching from the shadows at the far end of the basement corridor. One of Victoria's private security contractors. He immediately lifted his phone. She found the maintenance office. A calm female voice answered. "Victoria." Did she go inside? No. Good. There was a pause. Then Victoria spoke 4 chilling words. Keep watching her. That evening, Grace returned to her apartment carrying groceries. She immediately sensed something was wrong. The apartment door was slightly open. She never left it open. Her breathing quickened. Marcus. No answer. She pushed the door open. Every drawer had been pulled out. Clothes covered the floor. Kitchen cabinets stood wide open. Picture frames lay shattered. The mattress had been flipped. Even Marcus's school books were scattered across the living room. Marcus. She ran toward his bedroom. Empty. Panic surged through her body. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands. Before she could dial, Marcus rushed through the front door carrying 2 grocery bags. Grace. He froze. What happened? She dropped the phone and hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. I thought. Her voice cracked. I thought something happened to you. Marcus looked around the apartment in shock. Did someone rob us? Grace slowly released him. They didn't take anything. Marcus looked confused. The television remained. The laptop remained. Cash hidden beneath a drawer remained untouched. Nothing valuable had been stolen. Someone hadn't come looking for money. Someone had come looking for something else. Or perhaps sending a message. Grace's phone suddenly vibrated. Unknown number. Her hands trembled as she answered. Hello. Silence. Then, a calm female voice whispered only one sentence. Curiosity is becoming very expensive, Grace. The call disconnected. Grace stood frozen. The blood drained from her face. Marcus stared at her. What did they say? Grace slowly lowered the phone. She forced a smile that never reached her eyes. She lied. It was the wrong number. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't. For the first time since arriving at Carter Mansion, Grace stopped wondering whether she was in danger. She knew she was. And somewhere across the city, Victoria Blake quietly set her phone back onto the table. She smiled. Grace had received the message. The only question now was, would fear be enough to silence her? Or would Victoria have to do something far worse? Grace barely slept. Every sound outside her apartment made her sit upright. A car slowing near the building. Footsteps in the hallway. The creak of old pipes. Her mind kept replaying the anonymous phone call. Curiosity is becoming very expensive, Grace. Whoever had called knew her name, knew where she lived, and somehow knew her apartment had been searched. She looked toward Marcus's bedroom. The 14-year-old had finally fallen asleep after insisting everything would be okay. Grace wished she possessed even half of his confidence. Instead, she quietly sat beside the living room window until dawn, watching the first rays of sunlight spill across the worn apartment buildings. She made herself one promise. No matter what happened, she would protect Marcus, even if it meant sacrificing herself. Across the city, Ethan Carter stood inside the Carter Global Security Operations Center. Unlike the elegant offices executives used, this room looked more like the command center of a government agency. Dozens of monitors displayed live feeds from company properties around the world. Cybersecurity analysts tracked network activity. Former military personnel monitored physical security systems. Ethan rarely visited this department personally. Today was different. The head of security, Richard Hayes, walked beside him carrying a digital tablet. You wanted a report on every inactive camera at Carter Mansion. I did. Richard handed him the tablet. There are 7. Ethan stopped walking. 7. Yes, sir. Since when? Richard hesitated. The oldest has been offline for nearly 4 months. Ethan looked up sharply. 4 months. We've submitted maintenance requests. Who approved delaying them? Richard scrolled through the records. That's... His expression changed. That's strange. What? The approvals are missing. Ethan took the tablet himself. Every maintenance request existed. Every inspection report existed. But the authorization signatures had disappeared. Someone had deliberately removed them from the system. A memory flashed through Ethan's mind. Years earlier, the investigation into his mother's abuse had nearly collapsed because someone altered maintenance records from the nursing home. His jaw tightened. Richard. Yes, sir. I don't want anyone knowing we're investigating this. Understood. And from this moment forward, he lowered his voice. Every inactive camera becomes our highest priority. Richard nodded. I'll start immediately. As Ethan walked away, one thought refused to leave him. Broken cameras were no longer an inconvenience. They were evidence. He simply didn't know of what. Back at Carter Mansion, Victoria stood in the ballroom supervising decorators. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, while florists arranged thousands of white roses for the engagement gala. Guests would begin arriving in less than a week. Everything had to appear perfect. A wedding planner approached. Miss Blake, where would you like the ice sculptures? Victoria smiled politely. Near the grand staircase. Wonderful. The planner hurried away. The instant she was alone, Victoria's smile vanished. She looked toward the second-floor hallway. Grace was helping Linda polish the banisters. Working. Quiet. Watching. Always watching. Victoria no longer believed in coincidence. She needed certainty. She needed to know exactly how much Grace had heard. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Brooks called Grace into her office. I have an important assignment. Grace nodded. I'm ready. Mr. Carter's overseas investors are arriving tomorrow. She handed Grace a detailed checklist. I need someone I trust to prepare the executive guest suites. Grace looked surprised. You trust me with that? Mrs. Brooks smiled warmly. You've earned it. Grace's eyes softened. Thank you. The simple words meant more than Mrs. Brooks realized. Since losing her parents, Grace had rarely heard anyone say they trusted her. It reminded her of her mother. As a little girl, Grace used to help fold laundry every Saturday morning. Whenever she finished neatly, her mother would kiss her forehead and say, Trust isn't something people give you because you're perfect. They give it to you because you choose honesty even when it's difficult. That memory stayed with her as she gathered fresh linens and headed upstairs. She had no idea honesty was about to become the very reason someone wanted to destroy her. While preparing one of the executive suites, Grace noticed something unusual. A housekeeping inventory tablet had been left charging on a desk. The screen displayed maintenance records for the mansion. Without thinking, she searched for the hallway camera outside the staff lockers. Status maintenance pending. She frowned. Then she checked the West Wing camera. Status maintenance pending. The ballroom corridor. Maintenance pending. Private conference hallway. Maintenance pending. Grace counted them. 7 cameras. Exactly 7. all located near areas where Victoria frequently held private meetings. A cold feeling settled over her. Could all of this really be a coincidence? She reached for her work phone. Not to report anyone, only to photograph the maintenance screen so she could ask Mrs. Brooks about it later. The camera shutter clicked softly. She slipped the phone back into her apron. She didn't know. A tiny security application automatically saved the time and location of every photograph taken on company property. A feature introduced years earlier after corporate fraud investigations. Another seemingly ordinary detail, quietly planted, waiting for the moment it would matter. Grace finished the guest suite and stepped into the hallway. She stopped. Victoria stood at the opposite end, perfectly still, almost as if she'd been waiting. Their eyes met. Victoria smiled. "Grace, good afternoon, ma'am. You've been very busy lately." Grace nodded politely. "Mrs. Brooks has given me extra responsibilities." "I'm aware." Victoria slowly walked closer. Each step echoed through the silent hallway. "I've also noticed," she paused, "that you're becoming interested in things beyond housekeeping." Grace's heartbeat quickened. "I don't understand." "I think you do." Victoria stopped only a few feet away. Her smile remained beautiful. Her eyes did not. "You've overheard conversations." Grace remained silent. "You've asked questions about cameras." Still silent. "And today?" Victoria glanced briefly toward Grace's apron. "You photographed company records." Grace's heart nearly stopped. How could she possibly know that? Victoria leaned slightly closer. "I'll give you one opportunity." Grace couldn't move. "If you've misunderstood something." Victoria's voice became almost gentle. "Forget it." She turned to leave. Then, without looking back, she said the words that made Grace's blood run cold. "Because the next mistake won't end with someone searching your apartment." Victoria walked away. Grace stood frozen in the hallway. Her hands trembled so violently, she nearly dropped the stack of folded towels she was carrying. She finally understood. The apartment hadn't been random. The phone call hadn't been random. The searched locker hadn't been random. Someone wasn't trying to scare her anymore. Someone was preparing her for something worse. Far worse. And hidden inside her apron pocket. Her work phone quietly waited. Neither Grace nor Victoria realized that the device both of them barely thought about would soon become the most important witness in Carter Mansion. The engagement gala was less than 48 hours away. By sunrise, Carter Mansion no longer looked like a private residence. It looked like a palace preparing for royalty. Luxury vehicles arrived one after another carrying florists, event planners, musicians, lighting specialists, celebrity chefs, and security consultants. White roses filled the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers reflected thousands of tiny lights across the polished marble floors. Every hallway buzzed with excitement. To everyone else, this was the beginning of a fairy tale ending. Only 3 people knew it was becoming the beginning of a nightmare. Grace, Victoria, and Miranda. Grace tried to lose herself in work. She polished silverware, helped arrange the dining hall, prepared guest rooms, folded napkins, anything that kept her mind away from the growing fear inside her. She hadn't told Mrs. Brooks about the apartment. She hadn't told Ethan about the threats. She hadn't even told Marcus the truth. The less people knew, the safer they would be. Or at least, that's what she kept telling herself. As she carried fresh flowers toward the West Wing, her phone vibrated. It was Marcus. She smiled and answered immediately. "Hey." Marcus sounded excited. "I got my science test back." "Really?" "I scored 98. Grace laughed. "I knew you could do it. I wanted to tell you first. I'm so proud of you." There was a brief silence before Marcus spoke again. "You sound tired." "I'm okay. You've been saying that all week." Grace forced another smile, even though he couldn't see it. "I've just been working extra hours." Marcus hesitated. "Grace." "Yeah. If something's wrong, you'll tell me, right?" She closed her eyes. "I promise." It was the second promise she made that she already knew she couldn't keep. At almost the same moment, Ethan Carter was inside his private office, reviewing the security audit Richard Hayes had delivered late the previous night. The report disturbed him. Every inactive camera was positioned near areas where confidential conversations frequently occurred. Even more troubling, maintenance requests had been repeatedly delayed without authorization. He looked up as Richard entered. "Any progress?" Richard nodded. "We recovered part of the deleted access logs. And they were erased using administrator credentials." Ethan frowned. "Only 3 people have that level of access." "Correct." Richard hesitated. "And one of those accounts was used while you were in Switzerland 3 months ago." Ethan slowly leaned back in his chair. Someone inside his own household, someone he trusted, had been manipulating the security system. He wasn't ready to accuse anyone, but the circle of suspects had just become much smaller. Upstairs, Victoria entered Miranda's private suite and quietly closed the door. Miranda immediately noticed the tension on her daughter's face. "What happened?" Victoria didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the window overlooking the estate. "She's still here." Miranda sighed. "Grace?" Victoria nodded. "I've threatened her. Someone searched her apartment. She knows she's being watched." Miranda folded her arms. "And yet she keeps coming back." Victoria's jaw tightened. "I underestimated her." Miranda walked closer. "Then stop underestimating her." The room fell silent. Finally, Miranda spoke the words neither of them had wanted to say aloud. "If fear isn't enough, then you'll have to make sure she never speaks." Victoria slowly turned. Her expression remained calm, almost emotionless. "I understand." That afternoon, Grace was asked to prepare refreshment in the private family lounge. The room sat only a few doors away from Ethan's study. It was usually quiet. She arranged coffee cups on a silver tray before placing pastries onto elegant serving plates. As she finished, she heard voices. Victoria. Miranda. Another man. The lawyer. The lounge shared a thin connecting wall with a small private meeting room. Normally, the conversations inside were impossible to hear. Today, someone had forgotten to close the adjoining pocket door completely. Grace wasn't trying to eavesdrop. She simply froze when she heard Ethan's name. "The engagement is almost here," the lawyer said. "And after the honeymoon?" Victoria asked. "We'll begin transferring voting control exactly as planned." Miranda spoke next. "What about the original will?" The lawyer lowered his voice. "We've searched everywhere. It has to be somewhere inside this house." Victoria's voice turned cold. "Then keep looking. If Ethan finds it before signing, everything we've worked for dies." Grace's heart pounded. Original will. Voting control. Transfer. She still didn't understand the legal details. But she understood enough to know someone was hiding something from Ethan. Without thinking, she slowly reached into her apron. She removed her work phone. Her hands trembled. She wasn't trying to spy. She only wanted proof that she hadn't imagined the conversation. She quietly opened the voice recorder. Then, she pressed record. The tiny red light appeared on the screen. Inside the meeting room, the lawyer continued. The forged trust documents are ready. Grace's eyes widened. Forged? Miranda whispered urgently. Lower your voice. Victoria answered without concern. No one's around. Grace's breathing became shallow. Every instinct told her to walk away. Instead, she held the phone tighter. Inside the meeting room, Victoria laughed softly. In 48 hours, Ethan Carter will willingly hand me control of the empire his father spent a lifetime building. Grace almost dropped the phone. She finally understood. This wasn't wedding planning. This was fraud. She carefully took one small step backward. The old wooden floor beneath her shoe creaked. A sharp crack. The voices inside stopped instantly. Complete silence. Grace's heart slammed against her chest. The meeting room door burst open. Victoria stepped into the hallway. Their eyes met. Grace instinctively lowered her phone to her side. Victoria looked from Grace's frightened face to the phone still glowing in her trembling hand. Neither woman spoke. For several terrifying seconds, the hallway was completely silent. Then Victoria smiled. A smile so calm, so beautiful, that it made Grace even more afraid. My goodness, Grace, Victoria said softly. Were you recording us? Grace's lips parted. No. But before she could finish, Victoria took one slow step toward her. Then another. Grace instinctively stepped backward. The silver tray slipped from her other hand. Porcelain cups exploded across the marble floor. The sound echoed through the entire hallway. Somewhere downstairs, Ethan looked up from his meeting. Mrs. Brooks stopped walking. Old Samuel slowly turned toward the staircase. Something had just happened. Victoria never took her eyes off Grace. Her smile disappeared. You've made a very a serious mistake. Grace's fingers tightened around the phone. Every survival instinct inside her screamed one word. Run! The shattered porcelain cups continued rolling across the polished marble floor. The sound echoed through the West Wing like tiny alarm bells. For one suspended moment, neither woman moved. Grace Johnson's heart pounded so violently she could hear it in her ears. The work phone felt impossibly heavy in her trembling hand. Its screen was still awake. The recording was still running. Victoria Blake's eyes locked onto it. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. She simply stared. Then, very slowly, she closed the meeting room door behind her. Click. The sound was soft, yet somehow more terrifying than the crashing dishes. Grace instinctively took another step backward. Miss Blake. Her voice shook. I wasn't trying to. Victoria raised one finger. Grace fell silent. The beautiful smile returned to Victoria's face. Anyone walking into the hallway at that exact moment would have seen a graceful fiancée speaking politely with a frightened maid. Only Grace could see the hatred burning behind Victoria's eyes. So, Victoria said calmly, You heard everything. Grace swallowed. I didn't mean to. No. Victoria continued walking toward her. Then why were you recording? Grace's fingers tightened around the phone. I got scared. Scared of what? Grace couldn't answer. Victoria stopped only a few feet away. Tell me the truth. Grace lowered her eyes. I heard you talking about forged documents. The smile disappeared. I heard you talking about Ethan's father's will. Victoria's breathing slowed. And I don't understand everything. Grace admitted honestly. But I know Mr. Carter deserves to know. Silence. A dangerous, unnatural silence. Victoria looked at Grace as though seeing her for the first time. Not as a maid. Not as an employee. But as an obstacle. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost gentle. I gave you several chances. Grace remained silent. I warned you. Another step. I frightened you. Another. I even searched your apartment. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You. Victoria nodded without remorse. Yes. Grace's chest tightened. You threatened Marcus. I did. You called me. Yes. Grace could barely believe what she was hearing. Victoria wasn't denying anything anymore. She wasn't pretending. There was no reason to. She believed no one else could hear them. No one will believe a maid over me, Victoria said quietly. They'll believe you. Grace's voice cracked. Because you're rich. Victoria tilted her head slightly. No. She smiled. Because I spent 4 years making sure they trust me. Grace slowly realized the terrifying truth. Victoria wasn't simply cruel. She was patient. Every lie, every smile, every charity event, every perfect public appearance had been carefully constructed long before Grace ever entered Carter Mansion. It wasn't an act created overnight. It was an identity. One built brick by brick for years. Grace whispered, Mr. Carter loves you. Victoria laughed. He loves the woman I allowed him to see. Those words hit Grace harder than any slap. For the first time, she truly understood the depth of Victoria's deception. Grace looked down at the phone still clutched in her hand. The recording timer continued counting upward. Victoria noticed. Her eyes narrowed. Give me the phone. Grace slowly shook her head. I can't. Victoria took another step. I wasn't asking. Grace stepped backward again. There has to be another way. There isn't. I don't want trouble. You already chose trouble. Grace reached the hallway intersection. Behind her, the grand staircase descended toward the ballroom where workers continued preparing for the engagement gala. If she could reach the stairs, maybe she could find Mrs. Brooks. Maybe Ethan. Maybe anyone. Victoria noticed the glance. Without warning, she lunged. Grace gasped and stumbled backward. The phone slipped slightly in her hand, but she managed to catch it. Victoria grabbed her wrist. Delete it. I can't. Delete it. Grace pulled away with all the strength she had. For a split second, she broke free. She turned and ran. Her footsteps echoed through the hallway. Behind her, Victoria chased without hesitation. Grace rounded the corner toward the private family corridor. Her breathing became ragged. She could hear Victoria's heels striking the marble floor behind her. Faster. Closer. Grace. She didn't stop. She couldn't. She reached for the nearest staircase. A hand seized the back of her uniform. The fabric tightened painfully around her shoulders. Grace cried out as she was yanked backward. The phone flew from her hand. It struck the floor, sliding several feet away. Both women looked at it. For one desperate second, neither moved. Then they ran toward it at exactly the same time. Grace reached it first. She grabbed the phone and hugged it against her chest. Victoria's face transformed completely. Every trace of elegance vanished. Every trace of charm disappeared. Only fury remained. "You stupid little maid." She shoved Grace violently against the wall. Grace hit the marble with a painful thud. The phone nearly slipped from her hands again. Victoria grabbed both of Grace's shoulders. "Delete the recording." "I won't. It's over if you don't." Grace's voice trembled. "Then tell Ethan the truth." Victoria stared at her. Then, something inside her snapped. Without another word, she slammed Grace harder against the wall. Grace cried out. Victoria's hands rose from Grace's shoulders, toward her neck. Her fingers slowly wrapped around Grace's throat. Grace's eyes widened in horror. "No!" Victoria squeezed. Grace's breath caught instantly. She clawed desperately at Victoria's wrists. Air refused to enter her lungs. The phone remained trapped between her trembling hands. Victoria leaned closer. Her voice became a venomous whisper. "Delete it." Grace shook her head weakly. Victoria squeezed harder. "Delete it." Tears streamed down Grace's face. Her vision blurred. Still, she refused. Victoria's grip tightened even more. Her next words were colder than death. "Delete it." She leaned until her lips were almost touching Grace's ear. "Or your little brother dies tonight." Grace froze. "Marcus." The world seemed to stop. Her strength faded. Her fingers loosened around the phone. Everything became quiet. Everything, except the sound of her own heartbeat. And somewhere deep inside Carter Mansion, a door opened. Heavy footsteps began moving toward the West Wing. Someone was coming. If your heart is racing right now, and you believe Grace doesn't deserve this, take just 1 second to subscribe to the channel and comment below telling us where you're watching from. I want to know which city and country is standing with Grace today. Because what happens in the next few moments will change every life inside Carter Mansion forever. Grace's vision darkened. Her thumb brushed against the side of the work phone. One small button, only inches away. The same emergency feature Rebecca had demonstrated on her first day. A feature almost forgotten. A feature created years earlier because Ethan Carter once lost the evidence that could have saved his mother. Grace's thumb trembled. Would she find the strength to press it? Before everything went black, Grace's vision blurred until the elegant hallway became nothing more than shifting shadows. Every desperate attempt to pull air into her lungs failed. Victoria Blake's fingers dug deeper into her throat. The polished marble wall behind Grace felt ice cold against her back, but the pain in her neck drowned out every other sensation. Her ears rang. Her heartbeat thundered. The work phone trembled violently in her hands. "Delete it." Victoria's voice sounded strangely distant now. "Delete it, or Marcus dies tonight." Marcus. His smiling face flashed before Grace's eyes. She remembered helping him tie his shoelaces on his first day of kindergarten. She remembered sitting beside his hospital bed after he broke his arm playing basketball. She remembered the promise she had whispered at their parents' graves. "I'll take care of him. No matter what it costs me. Fresh tears streamed down her face. Her thumb searched blindly across the side of the company phone. She wasn't looking at the screen anymore. She couldn't. Darkness was swallowing her vision. Then, her thumb felt a raised button. A tiny vibration pulsed through the phone. Without thinking, Grace pressed it. Nothing happened. At least, nothing she could see. The phone remained in her trembling hands. Its screen stayed dark. Victoria laughed. You think someone is coming to save you? Grace couldn't answer. She couldn't breathe. She didn't know that miles beneath Carter Global's headquarters, inside a secure encrypted server, a silent alert had just appeared. Emergency upload ACTIVATD. At the exact same moment, the phone automatically locked the recording, encrypted it, transmitted every second of audio already captured, and switched into continuous emergency recording mode. No flashing lights. No loud alarm. No notification. Exactly as it had been designed years earlier, after Ethan lost critical evidence in the investigation into his mother's abuse. A quiet system, built for moments exactly like this. Downstairs, Ethan Carter stepped out of the ballroom after finishing a discussion with event planners. Richard Hayes approached him quickly. Mr. Carter, what is it? Before Richard could answer, his company-issued security tablet emitted a sharp tone. One beep, then another. Richard frowned. That's strange. He looked down. His expression changed instantly. What? Richard turned the screen toward Ethan. Emergency employee upload activated. Location West Wing. Ethan's face hardened. Who? Richard tapped the alert. The employee identification appeared. Grace Johnson. Ethan didn't hesitate. Let's go. The two men hurried toward the grand staircase. Neither of them knew exactly what they were walking into. Upstairs, Grace's knees began to buckle. Victoria tightened her grip to keep her upright. The hallway remained empty. No footsteps. No voices. Only Grace's desperate struggle for air. Victoria leaned closer. You should have stayed a maid. Grace weakly shook her head. Victoria continued whispering. You could have kept your little job. Another squeeze. You could have taken care of your brother. Another. But now. Her eyes became almost emotionless. You're going to lose everything. Grace's fingers slowly slipped from Victoria's wrist. Her strength was fading. The phone nearly slid from her grasp. Then, a voice echoed from the far end of the hallway. Victoria. Both women froze. It was Ethan. He had reached the West Wing faster than Victoria expected. Instinctively, Victoria released one hand from Grace's throat. Grace collapsed to one knee, coughing violently. Victoria reacted with astonishing speed. She stepped backward. Tears instantly filled her eyes. Her breathing became shaky. Her shoulders trembled. By the time Ethan turned the corner, she had completely transformed. Ethan! She ran toward him. Thank God you're here. She threw herself into his arms, crying. Ethan caught her instinctively. What happened? Victoria pointed toward Grace, who remained on the floor gasping for breath. She attacked me. Grace's head shot up. No. She tried to speak. Only a painful cough escaped. Victoria buried her face against Ethan's chest. I don't know why. She suddenly started threatening me. I tried to calm her down. She pushed me. I thought she was going to kill me. The performance was flawless. Even Richard Hayes looked uncertain. Grace struggled to her feet. Her throat burned with every breath. "Mr. Carter." Her voice came out hoarse. "She." Victoria suddenly looked directly into Grace's eyes. Only for a second. No one else noticed. She gently touched the diamond ring on her finger. Then, almost imperceptibly, she made the shape of a phone with her free hand. Finally, she mouthed 6 silent words. "Marcus dies before sunrise." Grace stopped speaking. The words died in her throat. She stared at Victoria in horror. Victoria immediately burst into fresh tears and buried her face against Ethan again. "I'm sorry. I'm so scared." Grace understood. The threat hadn't ended. It had only become more dangerous. If she exposed Victoria now, Marcus would pay the price. Ethan looked at Grace. Confusion filled his face. He had arrived too late. He hadn't seen how the confrontation started. He had only seen Grace on the floor. And Victoria crying. "Grace." His voice remained calm. "Tell me what happened." Grace opened her mouth. Marcus's smiling face filled her mind. His science test. His laughter. His promise that he would take care of her one day. She closed her mouth again. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I'm sorry." The hallway fell silent. Richard frowned. Mrs. Brooks, Linda, Samuel, and several staff members arrived moments later after hearing the commotion. They looked from Grace to Victoria, then to Ethan. No one knew what had happened. Victoria continued sobbing quietly. Grace lowered her head. Her silence spoke louder than words. Mrs. Brooks looked heartbroken. "Grace," she whispered. "What happened?" Grace couldn't answer. Not because she didn't know the truth. Because she believed the truth would get Marcus killed. Ethan took a slow breath. "Richard." "Yes, sir." "Please escort Grace to the staff office." Grace didn't resist. She quietly handed her access badge to Richard. As she walked away, old Samuel caught her eye. He had worked with people long enough to recognize genuine fear. This wasn't the face of someone hiding guilt. This was the face of someone protecting someone else. Samuel watched her disappear down the hallway, then looked back at Victoria. For the very first time, he no longer saw Ethan's loving fiancée. He saw something else. Something much darker. Something hiding behind the perfect smile. Meanwhile, deep inside Carter Global's encrypted security servers, Grace's emergency upload quietly finished processing. A notification appeared. Evidence successfully uploaded. No one in the hallway knew it yet. Not even Grace. But the truth had survived. And it was now waiting for Ethan Carter to press play. Richard Hayes quietly escorted Grace into the staff office. The room that had once felt warm and welcoming now seemed unbearably cold. Every employee who passed by glanced through the glass walls. Some looked confused. Some looked disappointed. Some avoided looking at her altogether. Grace sat silently in a chair, her hands resting on her lap. Her neck was already turning red where Victoria's fingers had squeezed it. Every swallow sent sharp pain through her throat. She didn't cry. She couldn't. All she could think about was Marcus. Marcus dies before sunrise. Those 4 words echoed over and over inside her mind. Back in the West Wing, Ethan remained where everything had happened. The shattered porcelain cups still covered the marble floor. A serving tray lay overturned. One chair had been knocked onto its side. None of it made sense. Richard returned after leaving Grace in the staff office. "What do you think?" Ethan asked. Richard looked around carefully. "I think there was a struggle." "So do I." Ethan slowly knelt beside the broken cups. Something caught his attention. Tiny scratches marked the marble wall, as if someone had desperately tried to claw it while being held there. His eyes narrowed. He gently touched the marks. Then he noticed something else. Several long strands of dark hair were caught between the decorative molding and the wall. He looked up. "Victoria." She turned. "Yes. You said Grace attacked you." "She did." "Where?" Victoria pointed vaguely toward the hallway. "Right here." Ethan looked at the wall again. The marks didn't fit the story. Neither did the scattered pieces of broken porcelain. Something about the scene bothered him deeply. Before he could ask another question, one of the event coordinators hurried upstairs. "Mr. Carter." "What is it?" "The guests for tonight's charity reception are beginning to arrive." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "I'll be there." As everyone left the hallway, his gaze lingered on the claw marks one last time. A small seed of doubt had quietly been planted. Inside the staff office, Mrs. Brooks entered carrying a cup of warm tea. She placed it gently before Grace. "You don't have to drink it." Grace looked up. "Thank you." Mrs. Brooks sat beside her. "I've known you only a short time." Grace lowered her eyes. "I know. But..." Mrs. Brooks hesitated. "Yes."